Judith Butler's Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, first published in 1990, is a foundational text in queer theory and gender studies. It challenged prevailing assumptions in feminist thought and reshaped the understanding of gender, identity, and sexuality. The book is known for its complexity, philosophical depth, and radical rethinking of gender as not something innate, but something performed. 1. Background and context. Judith Butler is an American philosopher and gender theorist whose work spans across critical theory, political philosophy, ethics, and literature. Gender Trouble emerged at the crossroads of feminist theory, post-structuralism, and queer theory. It builds on the works of Michel Foucault, Simone de Beauvoir, Jacques Derrida, Luce Irigaray, and others, questioning the essentialist notions of womanhood and gender identity that had dominated feminist discourse. In the 1980s, many feminists argued that there is a common identity or experience shared by all women. Butler's Gender Trouble contests this premise. The book criticizes the assumption that woman is a stable category and that gender necessarily follows from biological sex. In its place, Butler offers a performative theory of gender. 2. Critique of the sex-gender distinction. One of the core targets of Gender Trouble is the widely accepted feminist distinction between sex and gender. According to this view, sex is biological, male-female, and gender is social, masculine, feminine. Feminists had argued that while sex is fixed, gender roles are socially constructed and thus changeable. Butler deconstructs this binary, arguing that even sex itself is not simply a natural biological fact. Rather, sex, like gender, is constructed through discourses and cultural practices. She writes, "Perhaps this construct called sex is as culturally constructed as gender. Indeed, perhaps it was always already gender." For Butler, the body does not come before culture. Our understanding of biology is always filtered through social norms and language. Gender as performance. The most famous and influential concept in Gender Trouble is that of gender performativity. Contrary to common usage, Butler does not mean that gender is something one consciously performs like an actor on a stage. Instead, gender is something one does repeatedly through acts, gestures, speech, and behavior, acts that create the illusion of a stable identity. Performativity implies that there is no inner gender identity that precedes or dictates these actions. Rather, identity is the effect of the performance. We do not act a certain way because we are women or men. We are perceived as women or men because of how we act. Gender is a reiterated social performance shaped by norms and expectations. Importantly, Butler emphasizes that these performances are constrained by existing social norms. One cannot simply perform gender however one wishes. Social sanctions, policing of norms, and institutional structures guide and limit how gender can be performed. However, the performative nature of gender also means that it is not fixed. It can be destabilized, parodied, and subverted. For subversion and parody, because gender is performative and not innate, Butler sees the potential for subversion through non-normative performances. One of the examples she discusses is drag performance, which she argues reveals the imitative and constructed nature of gender. Drag does not merely imitate femininity or masculinity. It exposes the performativity of all gender by exaggerating it. Drag, then, is not a mockery of women, but a way of denaturalizing gender. It shows that the so-called naturalness of gender roles is produced through repetition and social enforcement. The parody in drag performance disrupts the illusion that gender is tied to any stable or biological reality. Butler suggests that such subversions do not necessarily lead to revolution, but they do create moments of disidentification, dissonance, and critique. These cracks in the gender system allow for the possibility of change. Critique of feminist identity politics. Butler's critique extends to feminist identity politics itself. She questions the political strategy of uniting all women under a single category of woman. For Butler, this presumes a universal subject of feminism that does not actually exist. The category woman often marginalizes and excludes women of color, queer women, and others who do not fit the dominant image. Butler calls for a feminism that abandons rigid categories and is open to multiplicity and fragmentation. Instead of seeking to define woman, feminism should work against the regulatory norms that force people into limited identities. In this way, gender trouble shifts the focus from identity to norms and power structures. Butler argues that rather than trying to define who we are, politics should aim to question the mechanisms that tell us who we should be. Language and discourse. Another major theme in gender trouble is the power of language. Drawing on post-structuralist theory, especially Derrida and Foucault, Butler sees language not as a neutral medium, but as a regulatory force. Language produces and limits what can be said, thought, and known about gender and identity. Terms like man and woman are not merely descriptive, they are performative speech acts that bring certain identities into being. These acts are shaped by historical and social discourses, which determine what kind of subjects can exist. Language, then, is not just a tool of self-expression, it is a field of power. For Butler, understanding how discourse operates is key to challenging oppressive norms. Influence and legacy. Gender trouble had a profound impact on feminist theory, queer theory, and beyond. It helped launch the field of queer theory in the 1990s, alongside the work of theorists like Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick and Michael Warner. The book's emphasis on performativity influenced scholarship in literature, sociology, anthropology, and political theory. Butler's ideas have been both celebrated and criticized. Some feminists accused her of abandoning material realities and political agency by focusing too much on language and discourse. Others found her writing style difficult and her theory abstract. Nonetheless, Gender Trouble remains a landmark text. It opened up new ways of thinking about gender fluidity, non-binary identities, and the politics of recognition. In the 21st century, as public conversations about transgender rights and non-binary identities grow, Butler's insights into the instability and constructedness of gender remain highly relevant. 8. Continuing relevance. In more recent works, Butler has clarified and expanded upon the ideas in Gender Trouble. She's addressed some of the criticisms and emphasized the material dimensions of embodiment and precarity. Still, her original insight that gender is something we do, not something we are, continues to challenge simplistic views of identity. The performative theory of gender invites people to think of identity not as fixed and natural, but as something open to change, resistance, and creativity. It also raises ethical questions about recognition, vulnerability, and the social norms that shape lives. Conclusion. Judith Butler's Gender Trouble remains one of the most influential philosophical works of the late 20th century. Its radical reconceptualization of gender as performative disrupted feminist essentialism and laid the foundation for queer theory. Butler invites us to consider that identity is not something we uncover, but something we construct, or rather, something constructed through us. Rather than offering a clear solution or program, Gender Trouble opens up a space of critical interrogation. It challenges us to examine the norms we take for granted, to resist the pressure of conformity, and to imagine new ways of being in the world. In doing so, it continues to provoke thought, inspire activism, and trouble our assumptions about gender and identity.